Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Uncultured Company Chat, the second in the series. The first one that we talked about was about the uh, the relevance of religion and society today. But today it's none of that stuff. Today we're talking about something equally important, which is climate change. Now, climate change, there's a lot of talk about it, and recently also with the COP26 that happened in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. But we decided a bunch of friends would get together and talk about the relevance of it, the sincerity of it, and unlike the country leaders and corporations that make huge promises, we're going to bring it down to a human level and see how we can contribute what some of us have been doing, especially our guests, uh, Ash and Kurt, who actually dedicated a lot of their life to influencing the protection of planet Earth. So, thank you all for making time on this. I'll just do a quick round of introductions before I actually hand over the floor to our host, Rishikesh and Ethan. So Ash, as I always say, is the calm influence in my life. I don't know how he does it. He's always smiling. He's always calm. He's always in my hyper world. He's the one who can always bring it down to a level that it needs to be at. And I have no idea how he does it. I don't know what he's on, but I'm sure there's a secret to it. But I just love having him in my life. And he's an advocate of climate change to the youth and to children, especially in Singapore. And I've had firsthand exposure to it. On the other side is my very own Crocodile Dundee, who used to be also in Singapore. That's Kurt. He moved with his family to a little village in Bali about 6, 7 years ago, living in a village where his kids go to this eco-friendly sustainability school. And this gentleman right now is got a new in fact, I got involved with him because his son Bo introduced our condo to recycling many years ago, and that's when Kurt and Ash worked together to bring that change into all the kids in our condo that we live in. And Kurt has been building a school for the orphans in Africa about 7 or 8 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, and I was very uh, privileged to have documented some of it for him. But as I said, since then he's moved to Bali and he's now building a boat for some strange reason best known to him. And he intends to sail around the islands of Indonesia and make me even more jealous of the life that he leads. So that's Kurt. Then we've got Ethan, who's my nephew, but before he goes on to Switzerland early next year to pursue his hospitality degree, he says, which is basically drinking more wine and eating a lot of cheese. He's helping us with the PR in the Uncultured Company, which brings me last but not least to Rishikesh, who's been working with me for the past 10 months, I think, doing all the social media, digital marketing stuff about the Uncultured Company. And then there's me just blabbering on, so I'll keep my mouth shut now. And Rish and all of you, welcome to the chat. And over to you, Rish.
Welcome, guys. The topic, the focus of this chat, this conversation, so to say, is climate change. I think all of us sit on one side of the fence. There's no question about whether climate change is real or not. Though there's a lot of misinformation going on everywhere on social media around it. There's this whole woke culture as well, where people aren't really taking climate change seriously, but it's sort of become fashion to discuss climate change and just cosmetically show climate change as being your concern. For example, Tagore was telling me recently there was a Saudi prince who was all for conservation and who was all for conservation but still flew in a multi-million dollar aircraft which is a fuel guzzler. So yeah, how much of that seriousness should actually sink into people? How close are we to I wouldn't call it doomsday, but they do say that it's very close to the 12 o'clock mark as to where the Earth stands in terms of us reaching the end days. But yeah, how much of that seriousness should be there for us to take immediate action as individuals and as nations? This is something that I wanted to ask. Yeah. Kurt,
Let's start with the first question, Wish.
yeah,
Gotcha.
that
Yeah.
sums up the question.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot there, and you're right. It's an absolutely critical discussion that we're having here, and I appreciate you all for being here to chat about it. I think when it comes down to what we as individuals can do to make a difference, it all starts with those little things that you change in your habits every single day. Saudi princes in mega jets have a lot more change to get to than a village fisherman who's already almost living about as sustainably as you could possibly live. So the majority of us and many of us already know how to do it. In my mind, that's clear. But there's a growing sense, a growing population of wealth, and I'm not talking mega wealth, but enough wealth to live a somewhat luxurious life. And many of us can, where it's really hard to dial it back to become a village fisherman. Just to give you an example, I did a survey in my village in Bali on power usage, electrical consumption, and most Westerners who live there use approximately anywhere from 25 to 50 kilowatt hours a day electricity if you have air conditioning in a pool with pumps running. The local families use, can you guess? I'll give you a hint, one kilowatt hour a day. So right off the bat, we've got a lot of work to do. And I mean those of us who can afford the luxuries of life and really struggle to do anything different. How do we go back? How do I give up a car? These things I think about constantly as real hurdles to this real change. Even if it's an electric car, it's still a tremendous investment in natural resources, all of the things that go into it, labor and energy to build one. Can we do without? And it's got to sort of tend towards that direction of, let's pare this back and see how much happier we can be with less. Ash, I've been rambling on a bit, so I'll hand over to you on your thoughts on this. There's a lot more we can talk about here.
Ash?
Thanks, Kirk. I think my view is that while everyone is mostly clear about the need and the urgency to conserve and to be more environmental, conceptually it's clear now. But where people are struggling, as Kirk mentioned, is is a choice between the life that they have versus the life that is good for the environment. So the trade-off is where people are now struggling to accept. Right? I think that trade-off is a fair one because every generation wants more for themselves and for their children. There's a natural instinct to want to build more, right? But then the key now is to, as Kirk pointed out, to rediscover the wisdom in less is more, right? So the simplicity that Kirk is experiencing and the joys that brings is something that most of us, at least in Singapore, will find very hard to put our heads around, right? So that's one point I wanted to make, that is this belief that there's a choice. And this is, I think, the problem. We need to now find a way to balance it up. So it's not a choice, but rather you can have both. You can have a world that is modern, a world that is luxurious, wrong word, that people can be comfortable living with modern necessities, but yet doing it in a mindful way that is efficient and not making the problem worse. But if they feel it's a trade-off, then my fear is that human instinct will always dominate, and then we will always not put the priority on the environment. The priority of me will always dominate if they see that it's always a trade-off. So that's the challenge I have. And the way I've evolved my thinking is that since the last time, Kirk, we worked together on a community-based recycling project, and thank you so much for introducing me to this world. To be honest, I think Kirk and his son were the reasons why I got onto this journey. And where I'm at now is that I run a local business that helps companies understand their consumption using smart metering technology. So we measure electricity and water consumption in a granular way, and then helping them to understand where the unconscious wastes are. And naturally, most businesses, from our experience, once they know there's a waste, the human instinct kicks in and they want to remove waste, right? So it's nothing, they don't even take the environmental hat. It's just that this is waste, is costing money to my business. We find a way to reduce it. It is possible, right? So my own transformation now is I feel that the key is finding that balance. If you're not asking a business to be environmental for the sake of being environmental, we are showing them that being environmental is good for your business, and then it is no longer a choice. It is the same agenda. To make my business successful, I need to reduce waste. So that I'm trying to bring that point, and again, sorry, Kirk, I'm also rambling, but I think that's the key for the rest of society. If the society can see that it's not a choice of a good life versus environmental life, it is the same. A good life is one that the simple pleasures are, that you have the simple pleasures, less is more. At the same time, the comforts that we have built as a society, as a species, we don't have to go back on that. If they don't see the trade-off, if they see it's one and the same, then I think there's a lot more momentum that will come from that, rather than making it a trade-off. Yeah. So Rishikesh,
It's fascinating. It's fascinating that you've tied up economic goals with environmental goals and conservation and sustainability, because normally they are always at loggerheads, right? You're like Kurt mentioned, less is more. But our aspirations, they sort of always contradict the philosophy of less is more. You want a car, but that's not good for the greater good. You want to buy an air conditioner, but again, that's not good for the world. So it's always at loggerheads. Even from the point of view of governments, economic goals always contradict their ecological goals, the environmental goals. How do you address something like that? Because there are two sides of you pulling you in the opposite directions. How do you sort of create that balance?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge. Now, like for example, I was having this conversation with my wife the other day about automobiles. They're getting quite efficient now. I should say they're less inefficient than they're terribly inefficient. No matter how you look at it, they're getting less inefficient. But if we want to be more efficient, we take public transport. Singapore is really well set up for use of public transport. That in terms of overall energy consumption is far better than driving your own car. But through technology, we've created automobiles that are really nice. You almost can't wait to get in them. They've got, air conditioning, seats that massage your back, and a stereo system like you'd never find in your own house. Safety equipment. It's like the most amazing machine. And we all want one of those. So what's the incentive to take public transport if the cars are so awesome. So I said to my wife, I said, wouldn't it be great if like cars were back, like, remember the old Volkswagen Beetle we used to have, you know, that sort of barely made it to anywhere we wanted to go and would fall apart and smelled funny with exhaust in it. You know, it's like a noisy, awful thing. So, you know, if that's how the world was set up, where cars weren't so absolutely wonderful, wouldn't we choose maybe to use public transport as an option? You know, as fuel and energy costs go up and get scarcer, perhaps the penalty then is becomes too expensive. But then it's only expensive for the less wealthy. And then we have an inequality there. So I think, Ashley, there's a lot of things I liked about what you said, and if we look at human nature, I think that's where it's got to come from. This psychiatrists and the people that figured this stuff out of how people think. It's a big. I think there's a lot that could be done, like through marketing, to help change our minds as a global population of what's desirable. Marketing shows us, get that new car, buy the air conditioning, buy more, buy more, buy more. But maybe those same people that are playing with our minds in a marketing sense, can, you know, changing our expectations, could also do the same through, you know, through all kinds of media channels. So can we just as an example, Tagore, you mentioned the school in Kenya. When I visit there, it's a very poor country with very little. I live in Indonesia, which is actually, by comparison to Kenya, quite further along in terms of economic growth. But the happiest people that I've ever met are the Kenyans, and they sing constantly whatever they're doing, hanging the laundry, cooking dinner, trying to find a meal. They're happy. And what a strange thing is that we would choose the car and forego our own happiness as a result. Why? Is because we've been marketed to us that that's the right choice. Choose the car. Let your happiness go. Or we tend to believe that the car will bring us happiness, which ultimately it does not.
Yeah. I
guess that.
So Kirk, sorry, I was just going to say that I love your answer or your response, because it links another 2 to 3 points that I think are important in this conversation. You spoke about the media's impact on shaping the stories of success in our society, right? So people believe that if you are happy and successful, you need to have many things, and these are shaped by stories that our marketing machine, our media machine are generating. So if somehow we can rescript that narrative and make the simple joys become trendy. So when you talked about competing against a modern day car with all the luxuries versus public transport, it's very hard to compete that way, right? But then there's a third option, which is riding on a bicycle with the wind blowing in your face and enjoying that scenery that you can only get when you're focusing on cycling, right? If you're in the car, you're focused on the road and you can't see the beauty of what's happening. But when you're cycling, it's a different experience. And I know you're an avid cyclist and you know what I'm talking about here. But so my point is that there is a third option, which is the simple option that you have experienced. And now we need that stories, that experience to be reshaping the narrative that our marketing machines are throwing out. And that's where I think people like Tagore and Prakash, that you have that machine behind you. You understand how that tool works, right? And it's your choice as responsible storytellers to now tell the right narrative. And over time, if that narrative picks up, right, more and more people will jump on. So I think I loved how you linked that other point, and you can bring in the storytellers in this call because you are also a very big part in reshaping that narrative. Yeah, people
Is
like
it,
Kirk
is
who
it
are showing the way, people like me who are making businesses that are trying to help or make this move forward, and then most importantly, the stories. Yeah.
Is it easier for the rich to work more towards conservation? I mean, that could be extended to even countries. I mean, with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it's where does the accountability lie? The developed nations, do they have to work harder?
You know, there's a thing that Kurt said very interestingly, that the happiest people that he's seen are the people in the village that he's in right now, and people, for example, in Kenya. And I think what the danger is that, and if you look at the civilized world or the first world countries, they associate happiness with more, things that they buy. For example, first of all, you should be owning a car for the family. Then it went down to the second car, right? And that is how we measure our success in our life, and before you know it, it becomes a trigger for happiness. And as Ash said, that's what's being marketed to us. If you get that, diesel guggling four-wheel drive, I mean, that's happiness, that's safety, and all of that. And I think the more that the richer countries understand that, you know happiness has got nothing to do with what you possess in terms of materialistic things, I think that would be the first thing that we actually go to actually protecting our own environment and our lives.
Yeah. So this narrative that happiness comes from something more intrinsic than materials, this is, I think, a very popular script already in media. It's now a matter of using that, amplifying it, and getting more and more people to see it not just as a story, but as a way to believe. Like for me,
Yeah.
driving the car is of course very convenient, but cycling is so much more fun. It helps me lose the weight that I'm putting on, and I really need to lose weight. And I don't have to bother with the parking. I don't have to bother with in Singapore we have all the road ERP, right? The electronic road pricing. And so there are many other benefits that I think the everyday man would be more concerned about. And whether they believe in the environment or not, I don't think is so critical. But as long as the behavior change
Yeah.
and the effect is enough, right? Yeah. It's not so
Correct.
much of a value judgment, but it's just change in behavior to be more or less impact on the environment. And it's not a trade-off. Like for me, when I cycle, it's not a trade-off of a car versus a bicycle. I don't even compare it on the same.
I
But
was wondering if
I really agree.
go ahead, Kurt. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, Ash, I know exactly what you mean about. I'm a bit of a crazy cyclist myself, and ride as much as I possibly can. Whenever I can take the bike versus a car, I do. My happiness again is it goes back to that coefficient of happiness that when I arrive at my destination on a bicycle, I'm pretty pumped up. I'm pretty excited and happy. When I get out of the car, I'm kind of white knuckled because it's Indonesia, right? So driving here is the challenge. It's so much nicer to not have that stress of the drive versus the freedom of a bicycle. So I'm there 100% with you on that. There's, I guess, if we're talking about climate change, now getting back to the solutions for climate change, I think we touched a little bit on the COP26. My wife actually attended, so some feedback from her was that she was she was very impressed, I guess, with the high-level meetings that are happening not just with the government, government's government, but there's another tier of COP that is organizations, scientists, activist groups, groups for equality, all meeting and really digging into some serious solutions. And she was so impressed with what they're doing. And that doesn't make the news so much. We don't see that coming out of COP. What we see is the president speaking. But we have I'll say a friend, he's a colleague who was, came back and reported he was successful in gaining recognition for some of the smaller island nations in the Pacific who are at most risk of, losing with water level rising, and they're already losing. So they now, for the first time, have a voice, a collective voice at COP, and are receiving funding from other countries that can afford it. So, Rishikesh, I think you mentioned who pays for this. Should the richer countries be doing that? I think that's actually one of the main things that came out of this is that, yeah, if you got more, you pay more, because we don't have time to mess around with trying to get money out of countries that just don't have it.
Right, right. I think with us humans, unless we are forced to do something, we just get comfortable in what we are already doing. Something like that, if it could be weaved into laws, I think there could be greater success in bringing in that change. But at the same time, within a country, for example, there's the rich and the poor. It's very subjective because one law is for all. It's a little difficult to sort of place the same template for all people. So it's a little bit of a challenge. Can the law be used to bring in conservation, to bring in some change? That's something that came across my mind. What do you guys think?
I'll jump in here. I think for sure laws need to be placed. Governments are supposed to be.
Okay.
Sorry, Carl. Shall I continue, Carl?
Yeah. Go ahead, Ash. Sorry, I talked over you.
So I was going to say, yes, for sure, governments need to put in laws, and governments are in the system. They're the business, they're the people, and then the government, right? So government's job is to always ensure that there is a proper balance. So now that it's clear that there is not balance, and people are consuming way too much, governments must come in to set laws. So that's very clear to me. And the form of laws being set, I think it goes not just in the top line as a law in the country, but also in the policies set for industry. So, for example, in Singapore, last year they finally managed to formulate this thing called the Singapore Green Plan. So, after many years of discussion or consultation, the government has come up with a document where it details what different industries and different groups need to do now that we are clear on the need to act. A plan has been created. Some of it is driven by laws, but most of it is actually driven by guidelines to industry. So one of the guidelines that I was very impressed by is that they now require banks to, I think, ensure that they are not investing in certain areas, right? And to demonstrate that they are putting money into green bonds, for example. So they create different new criteria, and they are putting instructions to those institutions that will allow them to systematically become greener. So what I'm trying to highlight is that laws at top is important, but they also need this kind of guidelines to institution, because once they put that into the KPIs of the banks, immediately all the banks start to have to show that they are giving money to green business. So as a business owner, right, I'm now seeing banks telling me that they have this KPI and they are looking for ways to give loans or to invest in businesses like mine. And then that creates a spiral. because then money is flowing into the businesses that are creating the impact, as opposed to funding coal mines or some of the technology that we need to move away from. So my response to you is that definitely governments must step in because the balance is off, and the governments need to go beyond just law. They need to go deeper into the policies for different institutions.
I'll add another element to that. Can you hear me okay? I'm getting a bit of static on my end.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I want to add, Ash, I want to add something to that. From the government side, there's just as much impact on the personal side as well. So those two things together need to merge, and I think we saw that in the Makina, where the kids took on a mission of their own. And if you remember when the government ministry came to ask, we thought they were going to give us information on how to improve our process. They actually came and asked, "How did you do that?" We've been trying as a government agency forever to get people to do this, but here it just happened, spontaneously from grassroots. So the two sides eventually coming together, the government action and what we're seeing here in Bali, a lot of, especially the youth, very motivated, driven, passionate young people. I'm always so enthused when I meet them with a real drive and a real personal mission to do something good. And they will sacrifice any job, any hopes of wealth and advancement to follow this passion to fix things. And that's also where our future lies, the hopes for our kids, and how will they navigate this mess, that from a grassroots standpoint, it's a huge thing for me as an investor. I've divested of as much as possible of all companies that are not doing work. Anyone who's polluting or creating waste or human rights violations, we've gotten out of all of those, and actually specifically through a broker said we only want to invest in a certain category of companies. So the more people that do that, and more that people I know are actually doing that, they're making a change to their portfolios to eliminate those kind of companies. That sends a huge message. And that's not governments, that's not marketing. It's grassroots again. It's how people start to believe and change their attitudes. Those two things, Ash, I think together will be very powerful.
So thank you for bringing the point of government's impact on the people, the citizens. And I just want to ask your view on this, because I know both of us are parents of teenagers, right? So I see that sometimes the government, too much direction sometimes doesn't result in the outcome that we are aiming for. Just like when they came to us when we were doing the Makina project, they kind of realized that they cannot tell civil society or ground up to move. The more they say, the less authentic it becomes. Whereas for our project, it was completely isolated from them. It came out from our own desire to move something. So my question is, with governments on citizens, I have found actually that they need to, of course, set the right direction, that they must say that this is what we need to be, but they need to step back, just like with teenagers. The parent needs to step back so that the child internalizes, or the teen internalizes the thing and then does it himself. And often that authenticity is the key for it to really work. And so I feel that if I was in the shoes of the government, I'm kind of like parenting a teenager. The more I tell them that they should go green and they should do this and should do that, somehow it doesn't work. It's artificial. Only a few people will say yes, 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 but the majority will say, yeah, I do something else. But yeah, so I'm just wondering, in your experience parenting a teenager, what are the tricks that you think the government can use to motivate the citizens to take on that responsibility to want to make that change without being told to?
But Ash, I think there
Yeah,
are two folds to that though, because I think if you look at what happened at the McKenna, I mean, Bo started that whole the desire to do recycling, right? And instead of taking it to the adults, he took it to kids in the condo, right? But it still needed the support, and it still needed the guidance of the elders like yourself, who then help the kids make that dream become a reality. So I think we all do have our parts to play in it.
Mm. So if you take the Makina,
Just hold for a second, please.
This conference will now be recorded.
Right,
Okay.
Ash, so you were saying something. I cut you in between because of the connection. Please go ahead.
yeah, so I thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation around that project that we did in Makina, and that's how the three of us actually connected. Right? And then maybe we could look at that experience and see how governments and how people, organic movements interact. So if I just give a summary of what we did. So Bo and Kirk lived in our condo, and Bo at that time was, I think, 6 years old. Am I correct, Kirk?
yeah,
So a
he
small
was
little
6.
boy, he wrote a letter, handwritten, to the committee that manages the condo, and I was at that time sitting on that board. And at the end of a very long meeting, the agenda would be any other matters raised that comes from residents. So then the secretary would say, okay, we got these letters of complaints, and then there's this one handwritten letter. So at that time, I was like completely stunned that there was actually a handwritten letter, and it was not a complaint. So I took the initiative to read it, and then I was really, really impressed with what Bo wrote. So this 6-year-old boy said that he wanted permission to run a recycling business in our condo.
Wow.
He was
Wow.
basically asking the committee to allow him to do that. And then the way he wrote it, being a 6-year-old boy, handwritten and all, got me interested. And then I went on to meet Bo, and I realized that he was really passionate. And then of course he had Kirk guiding him and all. And he had a very simple idea. He said that he's going to go around his neighbors to offer the service to collect their recycled materials and bring it down into the recycling bin. Right, so it's a very simple thing. The final leg before the recycled materials get into the blue bin. But because he was a young child making that request to the adults, I thought that was really powerful, because imagine the young the adults that this is my world and I want to make it better, right? And that was a very inspiring idea. And we allowed him and supported him. And then very quickly, many other families joined on. And they used the same model of a family business. The father behind pushing the cart while the children knocks the door and hands out flyers to the residents, encouraging them to sign on to their business. So that project went well, and I think we have maybe up to 10 to 15 different families actively involved. And I know of one who is still continuing even today. Right? So that was what we did. And the government came across this initiative, and then they came to us to meet. And at that time, I think Kirk and I were thinking that they would tell us what to do, how to do this more. And it turned out that they were very curious about how we got this started and how we engaged the community to want to do this. And they were very supportive. I think that's one thing fortunate for Singapore, that the government is clear that this is a national level agenda, and they're supportive of it. Kirk, did I miss anything important in that storyline?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. It was wonderfully grassroots. Fantastic that it was a kid initiative, and it becomes, how can you say no as an adult to kids who come to your house and say, I want to take your recycling?
Yeah.
You're just in a position you can't say no to that.
Yeah. The marketing
So
was very
many of
powerful.
the neighbors signed on. Yeah, the response was amazing.
Yeah. And the other part that was, I thought, very powerful was the opportunity for the parent and child to work together on a child-led project,
Yeah.
right? So I think that was the other dimension of how this made it special, because it allowed parents to articulate their concern about the environment and speaking with their child, and then helping the child to lead the change, and then the parents supporting that effort. Um, and I think this organic ground up formula would be very hard to replicate if it came top down. Would you agree, Kirk?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I'll give another example too. In Bali, there was two young girls who started a program called Bye Bye Plastic Bags. They wanted to eliminate plastic bags from Bali, and they spent years working on this project, and were eventually successful. Um, it and they're actually quite famous now. They go around and speak at TED Talks. They were at COP26, and I think have been every year. So they're now environmental leaders, activists, even as kids. So like Greta Thunberg and others who are the young generation, their voices have tremendous impact when done well. It seems like you know it's hard sometimes to find kids that can fit that role, but they're out there, and there's lots of them, and we can and governments can take a lot of input from these kids as being leaders for any kind of green movement, because what parent wouldn't want to do something for their children?
Yeah.
That's a very
It
interesting
touches at
insight.
the heart, you know. And
I can sort of connect with it because here in Bombay, the beaches are, I mean, there's a lot of waste that's put out on the beaches here in Bombay. So there was an individual that I read about who started just him picking up waste material, garbage, all of that from the beaches, all by himself and two of his friends. That got other people at the beaches curious, and they then joined in. It became a larger movement, and that's when, once it became this huge movement, that's when the government stepped in. So it's an interesting insight there, that probably the grassroots movements are more powerful, more impactful, rather than it being a top down initiative. uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And also the grassroots movement, the key is the scaling. That means there must be some kind of mechanism in that idea that allows scale. So if it's only two persons doing it and they're doing a great job, it cannot scale. But the moment that the rest of the community feels that I believe enough in this cause and I can see how I'm involved, then it scales. So in our case, the scaling mechanism for the project in Makina was how we engaged parents in the discussion with their children. So really, it was not the child selling the idea to another child so much as the other parents in the community looking at what Bo represented and then saying that I would like that in my child too. And the parents came in to um, sell the idea to the kids. Right? And then the kids came in, and then very quickly we allowed the kids to connect with each other, and then we believed that it was their own ideas. So the point I'm trying to highlight here is that there needs to be a scaling mechanism that will make a grassroots movement rise. And that, I think, is the thing that we need to. Not all grassroots movement has that mechanism, right?
Right. There's one last question from my end, before which I think Ethan's been quiet. Ethan, you want to pitch in somewhere? You had a question or two there too, right? Go on, man.
Yeah. I like to always give back to the society, and I think, like me, there are many youth that would like to do the same. And us being the future of this world and wherever we live, my question is, what can we do as youth to change the situation that's today about climate change? What can we do to make it, a better future for all of us? Cool. Ash, Kurt, leave it up to you guys because you've done it a million times.
All right, I'll start. What I see that doesn't work is there's a lot of activism that's taking place now, and I think that I see kids wanting to shave their heads and go march in the streets and chant. But what seems to actually, that doesn't seem to work, right? I mean, maybe you get on the news, but I don't think it changes anyone's mind. What really works is kids that care, young people who care enough to jump in and try something. And that's the wonderful thing about youth today is they'll try anything. And they're really excited, and they have all kinds of information at their fingertips with, you can Google anything, you can get the answer to all sorts of things. So every once in a while, I see it happen where a kid comes up with an amazing idea. There's a kid I know who's figured out a way to sift out garbage from the rivers before they get to the ocean. Didn't make a big do, didn't march, didn't do any of those kind of things, but just did it. Made a prototype, had the idea, built the idea, and it worked. And sure enough, a village leader gets onto it and then introduces the kid to the regency head, pretty soon he's talking to the president of the country. So, and leaders in industry also that, say, hey, this kid's got a great idea. We can make a fortune out of this if, we produce this for him. So there's that in the economic system, that there's our capitalist world in action. Somebody's got a really good idea, and we, it becomes, like startup companies. All the startup companies most want to just get sold. They went and bought out and then retire. So this is another, the same model could be followed for young people today. Spend your time thinking on solutions to the problems that many of us have overlooked. And it doesn't have to be complex. It can be very simple, some of these things. There's a young kid working on a machine that will harvest plastic in the ocean, reprocess it into usable fuel. And how cool is that? And he's got backing, and he's done, started off on Kickstarter or something like that, and now he's just taken off. And great, that's what we need. This is the ideas that young people have. And so I encourage you to take some action like that. Get together with a group of friends, identify a problem, and think of a solution. Try it out and see how it goes. And good luck and best of luck. And we're all hoping that it works. The world will be behind you. Successful.
Yes, thanks, Kurt. And actually, what I was going to say was exactly the same as what Kurt was talking about. I think in the world, all the major revolutions have always been youth-led. Very rarely it's led by old people, right? So so the power of young people is actually very, very significant. So recognize that power, and the power is in reimagining the new world. So you don't have a legacy mindset like the rest of us have. So with that freedom, you can reimagine, and you can crystallize it in your mind, and you can help your other peers share that vision. Then that change will much faster than anything else. Yeah, so go connect with like-minded young people. Look at the problems that are hardest to solve, and then reimagine something fresh.
But just to add to what you guys both just said, I think it's the simple things. Switch off the electricity when it's not being used. Yeah, segregate your waste that can be recycled For example, say no to plastic. For example, yeah, uh, in in a in the first world countries, if you can travel by public transport, then choose that over or opting to drive yourself. If you can carpool, for example, wherever you can, these are the little things that actually make a difference to what we need to start doing at much the little baby steps, so to speak. And I think that's what we've seen with what Bo and the rest of the kids have been doing, at least at the McKenna in Singapore.
Uh,
Yeah.
right, that actually leads well to our last question. How far are we willing to, as individuals, uh, go to actually take steps that have an impact? This is a question I think that Tagore will like. One stat that I read was that 15% of the greenhouse emissions are from cattle and livestock that are reared to meet the meat and dairy industry. Now, I'm a vegetarian, not a vegan. Tagore too, I think, is a vegetarian. Uh, 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 should we all go vegan to make a major impact? This is not a loaded question. I don't, but I just want this question to be out there because it's a major contributor to greenhouse gases all over the world. So yeah, just wanted your thoughts on this.
Okay, I'll jump in on that. I think yeah, you're absolutely right with it's just there's so many things that we can all be doing, from changing our diets to our travel schedules and our the kind of buildings we live in. So I'm historically a carnivore, um, but have managed to change my ways. And it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, to be honest. So I still eat fish because I absolutely love fish, but have eliminated or reduced to a very minimal amount the amount of meat consumption compared to what I used to eat, and my family is right along there with me. So we're in it's not been a on off sort of transformation, but it's a shift that we improve on constantly. Um, yeah, it's not an easy thing, but especially when for a government to mandate we all become vegetarian, I think there's going to be a huge backlash. But if families like mine who are notoriously carnivorous are offered some advice by friends and family, and again from social pressures from our own group, not the government, then we start to change. And that's how it was for us. And then seeing, having your friends show you the light. I live in a community in Bali that we've actually created, with some eco-friendly ethos, and the buildings are made out of mud and grass, and they're all natural, and it attracts a group of neighbors who are similar thinking. So there's a few engineers, and one of my neighbors, a chemical engineer. And so I go to her for questions on what's wrong with the soap that I'm using, that I buy at the store? Why is this bio soap better? And she'll go into the whole explanation chemically, from chemical analysis of what the differences are and what the effect is in the environment. So we as people, if we can kind of knock down the fences that we put up between each other for our daily lives, and open up, spend time together talking about what works. And everybody's got some environmental knowledge. And you'd be surprised. I haven't met anybody yet who doesn't know something really important about environmentalism. So if we're not talking about this amongst each other and showing each other in neighborhood settings, community settings, where all gathered around together, then they get lost. They're missed opportunities. Let's the solution is all in our communities.
My
Ash,
take
your
on
thoughts?
diet, I think for sure our society is taking too much meat, right? And we need to move towards more vegetables in our diet. I think that's both from an environmental as well as from a health point of view makes a lot of sense. But I've always tried to take a balanced approach, and this is more than just environment, but in general. So in my personal philosophy, often when we go identify one path and we go too deep into that direction, we kind of miss the plot. So I'm cautious about uh, pushing the vegan agenda because I'm also mindful of health implications and other inclusion consideration. Right? So some people who just cannot afford the fancy vegan food, what happens to them? Are they less valued or are they? So there are aspects to it. But I think my point I want to make here is that diet is just one of many things, and we are on this spectrum as it's a journey, like Kirk was saying. Right? So we're moving ourselves away from carnivorous diet to one that is more balanced and hopefully more vegetable centered. And yeah, it's just a spectrum. We don't have to be on the extreme of it, but just move in that direction. I think that's already that's more important.
Okay, that's good to know. Impressive from both of you. Good. I didn't know that you had reduced your intake of meat. I think that's amazing that you and the family itself have done it. And I know Ash has always been a balance of on this. So I think,
I think that
Krish, if you don't have any more questions, just want to say thank you to you for hosting this, Ethan for being there, Ash, my own personal Buddha in my life, for so much, and Kurt for being the crocodile Dundee in my life now.
Yeah. Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Tagore, and it's so nice to be here with all of you today, and good luck to everyone on this journey.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot.
Thank you
Thanks
so
a
much.
lot, all of you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great rest of the day. Be safe. And Kurt, we want to see pictures and videos of that boat of yours working.
Okay, I'll send some just after we hang up.
All right. Cheers. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Cheers.
thank
Bye.